right, today I'm gonna walk you guys through exactly what I did this week to increase pitching velocity and what I learned from training myself and also surrounding myself by some of the smartest minds in baseball. Okay, so I'm not gonna waste your time, let's get straight into it. So I'm going into more of a light BP phase where I'm facing hitters, right? So me and my training partner, we face each other and this kind of gets the intensity up, right? Which I'll touch on in a second. For the first day on a Monday, what I did was a 90% day. And I start off with a higher intent day on a Monday because it sets me really nicely for the rest of the week to recover and still get a lot of stimulus, right? So 90% day, which was a live BP day. Now, one of the lessons that I learned on this day was that my velo was a little bit down the past few weeks. And this was because I was struggling with something in my forearm. I felt like tightness and a little bit of pain, and so my velo was going down. I was trying to figure out why this was the case. Like, is it my mechanics? Is it my lifting? Am I not putting enough force behind the ball? Is it something I'm doing on the lifting side that is not going right? But when I started to look into it, I talked to the coaches at the Pitcher Lab, and they pretty much told me that my brain was guarding my arm. And so when the brain doesn't feel comfortable going at max effort, obviously it's gonna slow it down because it wants to protect and save our arm, right? The brain doesn't want you to get injured, and so it's going to protect you. And so just because my brain wasn't comfortable with throwing hard, it wasn't letting me throw hard. Even if my mechanics and my force production was there, right? If the brain senses something that's like, oh, we don't really like this, then it's gonna be timid, right? It's gonna contract and it's not gonna go at full effort. That was the first thing. And something that you guys can take from this is, okay, if your velo is down, maybe there's like a blockage from the brain, right? The brain is telling you, hey, like we don't really feel comfortable throwing this hard, right? And this is something we see a lot with the guys, even at the Pitcher Lab, is the guys who are coming back from surgery, injury. There are guarding things that happen. The brain is guarding the area that got injured, and so you're not able to move at full intense, right? And that was exactly what was happening to me. And so when I figured that out, the way I got around this and how I'm training it right now is underload training. I throw plyo balls, right? My whole career I've been throwing plyo balls, and recently I kind of got away from the lighter plyo balls, right? I would just throw the blue ball to warm up and then I would go straight to the mound. What I'm starting to incorporate now is the underload plyo balls, you know, the yellow and the gray plyo balls, because if I'm able to throw a gray plyo ball at full intent, right, and I'm throwing it in the low mid 90s, then my brain will feel comfortable with throwing a baseball. Because when you're throwing an underload ball, right, your arm is moving at a quicker pace than if you're throwing a heavier ball. The baseball is a 5-ounce object and the gray plyo ball is a 3.5 ounce. And so if I'm able to throw that hard, right, then it's starting to tell my brain, hey, you know, we're comfortable going at this pace and this speed, and so we'll be fine throwing a baseball. And so just by incorporating that, my velo started to climb back up. But this is more of an advanced thing, and so if you've never thrown underload balls before, you need to really take it slow, because, you know, underload balls are gonna put your arm through the most stress that it can go through, right? Because it's gonna be moving the quickest. Obviously, there are major benefits to it, but there's also risks, right? And so really be smart with it. Another way you could do this if you don't like the underload training is something like the pull down, right? When you do a pull down, you're gonna be able to throw at a higher velocity than if you're off the mound, right? So for me, I can throw about 5 to 8 miles an hour harder off a pull down than off the mound. And so if I'm throwing 90 off the mound and then I do a pull down at 95, 96, 97, then the brain is gonna be like, okay, the body can handle 95, 96, 97. Now it'll allow me to get up to that speed on the mound. And I know this sounds kind of woo-woo and all that, but it's a very real thing. If the brain is guarding and not letting you like go full effort, then you're just not gonna throw as hard as you can. So as I started to incorporate these two things, my velocity started to increase because my intent started to come back. I started to feel comfortable with putting my arm through that. And so that was the first lesson on Monday was, okay, this is more of a high intent day. Let's start to get the intensity back, the intent back, and get the brain to feel comfortable going at high intents, because throwing is a very stressful thing. After my throwing, I did my lifting, which I'm actually going to touch on in depth on Wednesday of like what exactly I did, what I was focused on. So let's just move on to Tuesday for now. So Tuesday was a recovery day because if we went high intent, then we need to be able to recover, right? If we're putting our body through a lot of stress on Monday, then we need to recover as much as possible on Tuesday. One thing that I see a huge mistake people make is throwing at a high intent on a Monday and then lifting on a high intent on Tuesday. You never want to do that, right? You want to stack as much stress on one day and then you want to recover, completely let your body relax on the next day. For this day, I played a little bit of light catch just to get the blood flowing, but nothing too crazy. But the one thing that I did do that I thought was really, really helpful for me was doing some delivery feels and dry reps. Now, this is a hot take and this is very athlete dependent, right? But for myself, I really like dry reps in terms of feeling out my mechanics. Because when I'm throwing at my hardest, when I'm throwing the best, I'm pitching the best, my delivery just feels natural, right? And it just flows. And that's where I want to get to where my delivery just feels right. And I feel like you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes the delivery just doesn't feel right, and in turn your command is bad, your velo is bad. And so I want to make my delivery so subconscious that it just feels natural, right? I don't even have to think about it, and a lot of things are going right. Obviously, I'll be working and tweaking some stuff, and that's going to require conscious thought. But for the most part, I just want to make my delivery feel so natural so that it makes it easier for me to be consistent with velocity and command stuff, right? And so for my dry reps, I literally just do it outside, and then it's more like a visualization exercise. So I'm thinking about facing hitters, right? Because I am going through a live BP phase where I'm competing, and I want to just visualize dominating hitters. This is another powerful thing with visualization is there was a guy who was in prison, right, for multiple years. The only thing that he did during that time was visualize himself playing golf for multiple hours of the day, right? And he had never played golf prior to this. But every single day he would visualize himself playing, right? And he would just like visualize it, imagine it. And then when he got out of prison, he was actually a really good golf player, even though he had never played golf before going to prison. Okay, so that's how powerful visualization can be. And I want to start incorporating this into my training because, I mean, if you're just not doing it, then you're not doing everything you can to be better, right? Like if it's such a powerful thing. There's even a really famous study about free throws. With free throws, there were two groups. One group would just, practice like normally, and then the other group would just visualize them throwing it into the hoop. It's like, okay, shooting. And then when they compared who got better, the visualization group pretty much got just as good as the other group. And I'm incorporating this because I'm pretty much all in, right? I'm all in into throwing 100 and getting to the MPB, which is my goal, right? And playing professional baseball again. So I want to do everything that I can on every single day. I give myself about 4 hours a day to chase this dream, right? And so for this day, it took up, the 4 hours were taken up by my throwing and lifting stuff. I did this for a long time, It's not like I'm whipping my arm. It's just like a slow thing so that I'm not stressing my body, but I'm still getting that mental work in, right? And so for that, Tuesday, this is something that I'll probably continue to do on my recovery days because I think it's just so valuable. Okay, so moving on to Wednesday, this is more of a 60 to 70% day. Okay, so what we did was we did a pitch design day where I was trying to create a new pitch, right? It was a gyro, but it was just a bullpen, all right? We were unsuccessful with creating a gyro, unfortunately, but we are still working on it, right? I wanted a gyro because it'd be good for lefties. I don't really have a good weapon against lefties. I want to talk about the weightlifting because that's what you're interested in. What am I focused on with my lifting this week? I talk about concentric impulse. This is the number one thing that I'm focused on right now, which is my lower body concentric impulse. And basically what this is being able to rebound out of positions extremely quickly and powerfully. If you look at the back leg, right, you are dropping and then getting out of that position really explosively, right? Even the front leg, you're getting into this position where you're landing and then you have to get out of it really quickly. And this is something that I did extremely well when I was an upper 90s thrower. I would do back squats with about 350 on my back, and I could jump that, right? And get my feet off the ground, and I would just jump squat. That's a crazy amount of horsepower, right? But I'm not able to do that anymore. I had surgery on my spine, right? And so I'm not able to load anything on my back anymore. And so for the longest time, I kind of neglected lower body power because I couldn't deadlift, I couldn't squat, and so I couldn't really do much. But this is the number one thing that I'm getting back to, because that is one of the strengths that led to me throwing in the upper 90s. And so how I'm doing this is belt squats, right? Belt squats, and I'm also incorporating back trap bar deadlifts. Firstly, with the belt squats, I love belt squats because it doesn't load up your spine, right? It doesn't compress your spine. And in my mind, it's a superior option to the back squat. Yes, the back squat is very, very valuable. If you have a lot of weight on your back and you're able to move it explosively, then that is a great exercise because it incorporates the whole body. It incorporates the core, it develops inner abdominal pressure, right? You have to be super strong here so that you don't collapse, but it does compress your spine. And so as a pitcher, we want to be, like a whip. The spine has to be like a whip. And for that reason, I don't really like it for too many guys, right? It's also how I herniated my disc, was because I was going so heavy on the back squat. Like at one point I was squatting over 500 pounds and the compression just became too much and I herniated a disc and I was bedbound for a month, right? And so for that reason, I don't really like it, but the belt squats, I love it so much. And what I do with this is belt squat jumps. It's just training my ability to absorb all of that force, right? And then catapult myself upwards and then do that continuously. And if you do that with a heavy weight, it develops concentric impulse like no other, right? It just develops so much lower body power, which is needed, especially for me, who is such a lower body dominant pitcher, right? To throw harder. Also, I'm incorporating trap bar deadlifts, and I touched on it a little bit, but I wanted something that incorporates the whole body, right? Because, the belt squat is nice, but the weight is at your hips, right? And so everything here is kind of tensionless. It's not really working as much. But I want to be able to incorporate my whole body because I want to teach my core to really stabilize, build inner abdominal pressure, right? That's a huge, huge thing that I've been thinking about, which is how good your core is to transfer energy up to the upper body. My partner has actually seen hundreds of mocaps, and we see a lot of leakage in the midsection, right? Some guys can produce astronomical amounts of power in the lower body, but it's just not getting to the upper body because the abs and the deep core, right, isn't strong enough. And that's what I think was happening with me, was I was really developing my lower body with the belt squats, right? Very, very powerful lower body. But because I wasn't incorporating my whole body, my core and my inner abdominal strength was kind of lacking. I was losing a lot of energy in the midsection. Okay, so from a lifting standpoint, I'm starting to incorporate trap bar deadlifts so that it teaches my core to really stabilize, and I'm incorporating my whole body, right? For this, I'm doing more VBT type exercises where I'm trying to either lift 315 or 405 as hard as I can, right? When I'm doing 315, I do a jump with it, so I'm actually jumping with 315, or when I do 405, I'm just trying to get it up as quickly as possible. And when I'm doing 315, I'm aiming for about 1 meters per second and above on a VBT machine. And when I'm doing 405, I'm aiming for about like 0.5 and above. Okay, so these are pretty good ranges to develop power. It all comes back to how much force can I be able to produce, right? How much peak power do I have to be able to produce a lot of force to the back of the ball? Because for myself and a lot of athletes, right, it comes down to how much force can you really produce. Right? And when I was throwing 98, I had to produce a crazy amount of force to be able to throw at that speed. Right? Some other guys, some of our other athletes are able to produce force in different ways. So it's very important to know what type of body you are and how you produce force to maximize what makes you good. Right? And if you have any questions on who you are and you want to work with us on increasing pitching velocity, you can always book a call down below. first link in the description, and we'll love to help you out. But moving on, so with the lifting, the other stuff that I'm starting to do, again, the overarching concept is use the whole body, right? Because this is something that I learned from Yoshinobu Yamamoto, and I absolutely hate how people are starting to say, hey, you don't have to lift to throw hard because Yamamoto doesn't. I mean, there's one Yamamoto. If no one had to lift, then we'd see a lot more Yamamotos, right? There's a guy who's coming to MLB called Imai, right? Who throws just as hard as Yamamoto. Everyone's comparing him to him. They're like, who is better, right? And Imai lifts a lot of weights to throw hard. There are different ways to get to the end state, but Yamamoto is in a league of his own. And I researched all of his training methods. I made a whole video on this channel about it. And I concluded that if I did what he did, I probably would throw 85 because I need to be very strong, right, tight and powerful to be able to produce force. He is just a different athlete that, again, produces velo in a different way, right? But the one thing that I did learn from him and reading his book and his methodologies was that he placed a big focus on incorporating the whole body in his training, right? Instead of like a bench press where you're just working the upper body like this. It's like, no, he does handstands, right? Because that incorporates the whole body, the core, everything like that. And so that is kind of what I'm starting to do more of. And so I'm incorporating more handstands, even a push press, right? Which is like the opposite of a handstand, but I'm overhead, right? And so I'm just trying to develop the whole body and make it work in an explosive way in unity, right? And so that is what the theme of my training is for right now. And this could definitely change as I learn more and see what works and experiments with what works. But that is what I'm doing right now. And this is something that we've seen a lot of good results with, right? With some of our athletes. Obviously, the trap bar deadlift and belt squats, the concentric impulses is something that is proven that if you increase it and you improve it, then you'll start throwing harder. But with this full body thing, like in theory, it sounds good. But I'm gonna have to go try it and report back to you guys on, okay, this is something that really, really worked, or maybe it was just eyewash. That is the focus that I had for my lifting. And this is something that I do every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. On my higher intent days, I'm lifting. That's key. Now, on Thursday, another recovery day, right? Light catch, some visualization stuff. But I had a call with Albertus because I was kind of struggling with my velo, right? I'm like, look, I'm kind of stuck in the mid 90s and I feel like I can be, 96, 97, 98 off the mound right now. And I was like, what do you see? And what he told me opened my eyes a lot. His big thing for me was my pelvis. Okay, so he was looking at my mechanics and he was like, hey man, like I think you've been too focused on linear momentum down the mound. And I was like, oh really? And it's like, yeah, like your pelvis isn't rotating well at all. You're not rotating very well at all. And so we were looking through video and he was right. Like when I would get to front foot plant, my pelvis was only rotated like halfway. It wasn't fully through. And so I was losing out on so much separation, right? And that's why when I would throw hard, it would feel very hard to throw hard. And when I throw at my best, it feels easy. Like 90 miles an hour should feel kind of like, easy. Everything's flowing and it's just like flying out of your hand, right? But for me, it was kind of like, damn, I got to brute force 90 miles an hour. And it was difficult, right? And so that was because I had less separation and less stretch in this oblique sling to propel my upper body forward and throw the ball, right? My upper body and my lower body kind of were going at the same time. And so all that was left was me just brute forcing it, which I think led to some pain in my forearm because I was brute forcing and I had to use more on my arm to just whip my arm through. That's what he told me. And also what he told me was that he just wants me to focus on one thing at a time. And it's funny because this is what I tell our athletes at the Pitch Lab all the time is like, hey man, just make sure you're focusing on the number one thing that you need to focus on, right? Your lowest hanging fruit. And if you start to, tinker with too many things at once, then you're not going to make much progress. And the funny thing is, I fell victim to that. It just goes to show how hard it is, right, to coach yourself, right? Because I was trying to coach myself on, okay, let's try to get 100. But when you have someone objective, for me, when it was Albertus telling me, hey, these are the things you're doing wrong, then it can become a lot clearer, right? And so that's kind of like the advantage of having someone watching what you do and guide you through this process, okay? And so what he told me was like, hey man, just stop messing with all different things, you know, mechanics wise, lifting wise, and focus on the number one or two things that you need to focus on for a significant period of time. So especially with my lifting, it's like, okay, if you're working on concentric impulse and power production, then just focus on that for like 1 to 2 months, right? So that you actually get that stimulus and you can adapt and get better, right? If you're constantly switching things every single week, you're not actually going to adapt and get the stimulus needed from that training block, right? And so that is my plan now, is to stick with some of these things that I'm working on, which is number one, the pelvis on my mechanics, and number two, concentric impulse with my lifting, right? And as I stick with that for 1, 2 months, it starts to become subconscious, right? And I don't have to think about it. And I actually get those improvements. And then I can move on to the next thing. Rather than, okay, I feel like it's good now. Now let's move on to the next thing, you know, within a week or two, and then you actually lose it because you didn't actually ingrain it into your body and your delivery. Right? And so that was the biggest thing on Thursday. Shout out to Albertus, and he's really going to help me achieve my goals of throwing 100 and playing in the MPB. So that was that. Now, Friday was a 100% or another 90% day, right? I wasn't really feeling that great. It was supposed to be a 100% day, but I turned it into a 90% day, another live BP session, right? And the biggest thing that I learned here was I did a live BP, right? I wasn't feeling too great. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to take it easy and just throw. Ended up happening was I hit 92 on that day, which is one of the hardest I've thrown in that facility, right? And it just goes to show how much more you can perform when you're competing, right? So obviously, if I were to get into a game with thousands of people in the stand, then I'll throw a lot harder than the facility, right? If I'm throwing with no one watching and there's no music and, you know, we're just throwing. When someone stepped into the box, my competitive juices started to go, right? And I got a tiny bit of adrenaline. And now, like, it felt easier to be 87 to 92. When before, if I was just throwing into the net, that would be max effort, right? And so again, sometimes it's not always mechanics and lifting that's going to get your velo increase, right? It can also just be environmental factors, right? Of like an adrenaline environment. Like for me, if I know that if I'm 92 in a facility, then I'm going to be 96, 97 in a game, because the amount of adrenaline is just like, you can't replicate it. At least for me, I can't replicate the amount of adrenaline that I get when I'm in a stadium, the lights are on, people are out, and there's a hitter that's trying to ruin your life, right? And it's like, all right, it's me or you, let's do it. And that just gets me going. That increases my velocity by usually 3 to 5 miles an hour. That is another lesson that I learned was, hey, you know, even if your velo's down, make sure that you take into account the environment, right? Because a lot of people can get discouraged, and some of our athletes, even at the Pitch Lab, don't see results because they're just training at a park by themselves, right? And they might gain like 1 mile an hour in 3 months, right? But we keep telling you, hey, like that's really good for the environment that you're in. And then season time comes in, they go into the season, and all of a sudden they're throwing 5, 6, 7 miles an hour harder, and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know where this came from. It's like, I mean, you worked on the right stuff, right, during your training, and even though it didn't show up there, as soon as you got some adrenaline, right, it just amplifies everything. And so you started throwing much harder, okay? And so that is the lesson on Friday. And so the weekend is for getting guys better and getting our athletes to be the best athletes that they can be. And that was my week for training throw 100 and getting to the MPB. And guys, please tell me if you like this type of video in the comments, and just let me know, because if you guys do like it, I can make some of these every single week, right? But if you guys don't, then also tell me what you guys would want so I can create some of that stuff as well. And I want to provide as much value to you guys. So let me know, and I'll see you very soon.